we were joking just before clicking record that all the work we've done together so far has been on the phone. So I haven't had the pleasure of seeing your face before. And I look forward to that being an in-person meet when that eventually happens. So it's great to see you today. Thank you. Jason, the purpose of this podcast, as we've already discussed, is investing.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to talk about today, but not quite in the same way that people think of the word investment. And to do that, we've got to create a whole lot of context. And so what I'd love you to walk us through is a bit of a backstory, how you became you today, and full open transparency. Jason has been coaching me consistently since I think we started in September, roughly last year.
Around then, yeah.
Yeah. And gosh, I've already learned so much, and that will hopefully come through in today's conversation. So for people that might not know you, who's Jason Parks and what brings you to the table today?
Sure. So basically, at this point, what I do is I do the very, very pointy end of energetic therapy work, solving problems that other people don't even know are possible to be problems. So I do that kind of work around what a lot of people call woo-woo.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, as that's evolved over time, I've done more and more mentoring around principles such as universal law, energy dynamics, relationship dynamics. My background in that, I started studying meditation, Qigong, martial arts around 12 years of age, and which is, that's 42 years ago. So
a bit of practice.
A little bit. And then I kind of obsessively went after it. And in the early 1990s, I managed to find a guy who was an envoy from the Shaolin Temple in China.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I went through a process, 18 months of interviews, and then 2 years worth of theory before I started to study anything of the physical work. And then went to China in 1994, was assessed there, and came back as an envoy. And Shaolin disciple, 32nd generation Shaolin disciple, and followed that for a number of years. I stepped away from the tradition in 2006, so it was about 17 years. And in that, I spent a period of 5 years as a civil monk within that tradition. So what that means is more like a minister than a Catholic priest. So to put it in context, so in Australia at the time, we didn't have the opportunity to have ascetic monks, which are what most people think of when they think about a Buddhist monk. You live in a monastery, you shave all your hair, you have no worldly goods, no relationships, nothing like that. That's an ascetic monk. A civil monk is expected to do 90% of the work and still manage to be in the community, hold a job, do all those things. So in the tradition, my job was running, overseeing 4 major branches that we had around New South Wales and the ACT in Australia, supervising their grading systems and their martial arts, working through with the Qigong, and had Buddhist disciples, all those sorts of things. So had all those duties on top. I stepped back from that and then went back into more secular life. And after that, I'd always done natural therapy study and work around that. And when I got to, my life kind of fell to bits around 12 years ago. And when that happened, I got put back together. I met the person I call my mentor, and Bess de Groot, and she rebuilt me. I was a wreck. I was completely burnt out. My mental wellness was gone. I was unable to work. I was stay-at-home dad under the worst possible conditions, like this is your life now. So not any sense of having prospects on the other side of it. And she used angelic therapies to rebuild me. And then she taught me. I already had a significant background in that, but she's my mentor because she taught me 2 important things. One, the importance of ethical practice. And the other one was like how to put it all together so that you can make it into this system that suits you and allows you to go forward. And we're still friends to this day. So,
Jason, this is awesome, mate. I've got, as you know, I love organic conversation.
Yeah.
And I've just jotted down like 10, 12 bullet points of cool shit you just said that I want to ask about. So we
Yeah,
could probably
sure.
talk for like, 6 hours, but wow. Okay, cool. So definitely we'll get to this like rebuilding idea and like,
Yeah.
shit, I feel like crap. I've got to do something about this. I love decision making, and that is the ultimate capital allocation, what
Oh,
decisions you
yes.
make
Yeah.
and the reaction to those as well. But before doing that, you you became a civil monk. I mean, Australia is not the kind of place I would imagine you meet many civil monks. And you mentioned the word obsess about martial arts.
Yeah.
Like, teach me more about that. So you were growing up in Oz and you just got bang into martial arts. I've got to go to Asia and go and get closer to this thing. Like, how did you even get into that headspace in the first instance and then physically get yourself there?
It started, well, it's one of those soul things, because it started when I was about 5. And 5 years of age, it was like I saw somebody doing martial arts on a TV show, and I was just
Mhm.
like, that thing right there, that's
Oh,
what
wow.
I need to do. And then you're like, okay, I don't know why I need to do that, but I need to do that. And then you started studying, doing all these weird and wonderful things, and then you just kept going. So by the time I got to the early 90s, I had I had third dan in karate. So a dan is like when you get to black belt, that's a first dan, and then every layer beyond that is referred to basically as a dan. Just
Mhm.
people are usually familiar with that. So I had third dan in karate and one in internal Taoist kung fu and one in taekwondo, and then I was like, I want to do this properly. And in doing that, it was like, well, if you want to do it properly, you've got to go to where masters are. And
Mhm.
masters aren't in country New South Wales. So, and I was an absolute hillbilly. So
Yeah.
that was the other part of it. But then from there, like I ended up finding this envoy in some funny circumstances, but it all sort of came together. And away I went. So I went to Shaolin Temple to be assessed. And it was funny because Shaolin Temple was when I was 5. My dad showed me some footage of the Kung Fu series with David Carradine. And it was
Mhm.
that, and it was just like, Shaolin, I need to go Shaolin. And anyway, I'm 22, I'm at Shaolin. So,
Wow.
yeah. So that's sort of how I got
And
there.
what was a day like in the Shaolin Temple?
Well, the process was really interesting. A lot of people probably don't realize this now because it's really a tourist attraction. So to go to Shaolin Temple now, it's not a big deal. You just throw enough money at it, and you can go there and you can have your authentic experience. And but what people don't realize is like the Chinese government in the 90s, they decided. Well, it was actually the mid 80s. They made a movie called Shaolin Temple. It was a national crisis. So many people left their jobs to go to Shaolin Temple to learn Kung Fu after this movie came out that they actually ran from the nearest city, which is Zhengzhou. They ran trains basically 24/7 for about 10 months, just
Wow.
sending people home. It was insane. And they realized we can make a lot of money out of this. So they did. If you go to Disneyland and you're walking along and you see like Mickey Mouse walks towards you, you know that's not really Mickey Mouse.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
the guy dressed up.
Yeah.
So in Shaolin Temple, you don't have that option because they paid people to dress up as monks, and they would walk around saying "Ami Tofo" to people, having photos with tourists, and it continues to this day. But I was very fortunate that what had happened, because of a lot of the political workings at the time, there'd been another school that had been set up at the direct desire of and under orders of the last real Chan master that was there, and like he was acting abbot at the time, and that was Su Shi, and they set up this school, and I went and trained at that school. So that was a different ball game. So you were at training at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then you trained for about an hour and a half doing work with weapons, and then you did breakfast, and then after breakfast, you did about a 3.5 hour block of qigong, which is like fundamentals and forms and all that sort of work. They had a siesta, and after the siesta in the afternoon and evening, then you'd go back and you do another couple-hour block, dinner, couple-hour block, and you did that 7 days a week.
Wow.
And yeah, and it
Proper
was
work.
hard training.
Mm.
So, yeah.
And it
Great
brings to
book.
mind, Jason, something that I think is so cool about this, where through your life, you pick up different insights that you can then utilize later down the line. And you and I were talking about being efficient with your time
Yep.
and how you can train yourself to be immediately prepared for what you need to do. And you gave me the example of watching a kung fu master basically wake up, stretch his neck, scratch his balls, and rock up, be like ready to go,
Yeah,
versus someone who's like, I need 2 hours of mobility before I can lift a weight.
exactly
And you
right.
you can just train yourself to sprint immediately. And we were talking about it specifically from more of an intellectual perspective. It's like you've got 3 kids running around. You don't have 4 hours to do deep work.
Yeah,
I was reading this book called Deep Work. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Unless I can get like a 4-hour
that's
window with
right.
like no interruption. You're like, no, mate, it doesn't work like that. So teach a little about that particular insight. And I love how it connects to something you physically saw somewhere very different, but then is part of what you now mentor.
Yeah. So I think one of the things is if you want to be outstanding at something, you have to find people that are outstanding.
Mm.
There's 2 reasons for it. I suppose it's inevitable. We're going to get into some woo woo. So,
Yes, definitely. Let's do
so
it.
well, the thing about energy, there's this principle, I think it's called entrainment, where if you get the best example is like if you get a whole heap of clocks, mechanism clocks, and you can start them with the pendulums moving at all different times. Within a couple of days, they're all moving exactly the same timing. And nobody's adjusted it, nothing. Just for whatever reason, they've
Wow.
all harmonized into that single thing. So we have this. This is actually a natural ability. It's an ability of the spirit. So when you stand in the presence of somebody who's completely outstanding, you're actually in the presence of the frequency they're existing at.
Wow.
So and this is also if you're around people that are rubbish, right? You're in their frequency as well.
Yeah, it
And
drags you down. Yeah.
yeah, so if you want to be really outstanding, you need to kind of be in the presence. You need to be clear and you need to be aware and you need to be in the presence of those people. And in doing that, you're going to learn on a cellular level. And it takes years for your brain to unpack that, but it takes a split second for your DNA to download it. And now
Really.
you have the cellular memory of excellence.
Wow. It makes me think about the fact that, and I don't know when I heard this or learnt this, but if a bunch of women live together consistently, they end up having their menstrual cycle at the same
Exactly
time.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've seen
Gosh.
that through the therapeutic work. You can have a whole heap of women together that have got all manner of different things going on. Their physical cycles are all completely different. And somebody can be on like a hormone replacement, and the strength of that will pull everybody else's hormones into alignment with it.
Wow.
And it's quite astonishing. So yeah, it's around us everywhere. We do that all the time.
Something I'd like to explore a bit more here is, so the Shaolin Temple, like they nailed product market fit, and everyone's like, let's go there. And they suddenly were like, well, let's make some money out of this. It's a very natural kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
process of human interaction. What interests me is this like essentially wisdom that was very real, that
Yeah.
actually just kind of basically forked off and went somewhere else, and you followed it there. And so how much of this experience of this life about unlocking different pools of wisdom?
That's a really good question. I suppose because I've studied this stuff for a long time, and I said obsessively, but I think it's not like wasn't there in the beginning. There's a compulsion of your ego. We just like, this is the thing that'll turn it around for me. This is the thing that it's the magic bullet. And of course, after a while, you realize there's no magic bullet to anything. So there's just sound principles, and whether or not you've got the willingness to change to meet the level. And I think that's probably the big lesson that I got out of all that was you can be whatever you want on one level if you're prepared to become the person that operates at that level.
Mm.
It is a constant problem that I see amongst people because people are a bit obsessed with things like manifestation and law of attraction, all that sort of stuff. But it comes from a premise that I'm going to stay where I am and it's all going to come to me. And it's like, that's not how that thing works. It pulls you towards where it lives. So if you're prepared, the rate at which you can change to meet the standard is the rate at which you get to move. And that was, for me, that Shaolin thing was powerful, because I went there. My assessment, even though I was in that tradition for years, nearly 16, 17 years, I think. And even though I was there for that, when I was in China being assessed, it was probably about 2 and a bit months. But I went away. I had such a weird experience because all my friends did martial arts. So we used to get in the backyard and spar and do all that sort of thing. I went away. For them, it was no time at all. For me, it was like a decade. And I came back and I was a completely different person. And it just weirded people out because they're like, yeah, we know what you're like. And they go to step in front of you and they're just like, I feel like I'm going to die and I don't know why. And it's like, because I'll kill you. That's why. Because I'm training that, right? You're training to go, this is not a joke anymore. And you bring a different energy to it. So, but we got to have that about everything. You got to have that in your life.
It's making me smile, Jason, because it's making me think of my friends that would joke about losing yourself in India, traveling, as a backpacker.
Yeah.
But actually, in some ways, they've connected to something far deeper.
Absolutely.
And they do come home and they're like, this is fucking weird.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the subtitles. I remember, because you're living with people who, for them, being skilled at martial arts is a way out. They're hungry. I was hungry. And that was the thing. So for them, it's a way out. You got people whose whole possessions, apart from the clothes on their back that they wear to training, everything fits in a little toiletries bag. And that's what they've got. That's all their possessions. Same people, immensely generous, immensely kind, but devoted, absolutely devoted to bettering themselves because they know that's the way you get there. And then you come home and everything's got subtitles on it. Your mates are talking about how tough their lives are. They're so broke. And it's like, well, I don't understand why you're so broke. Oh, because I went out drinking on Monday and then I went out on Tuesday and Wednesday. And now I want to go out on Friday, but it's Thursday, so I can't go out because I want to have a big weekend. And you just got these subtitles like, WTF, like, what am I listening to? Wow. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
And one of those really hard parts about that as well is what you knew as normal is no longer normal.
Absolutely.
And you see, and I mean, to touch on outstanding as a word, like if you want to be outstanding at something, by definition, you have to leave other things behind. And so it's quite hard, frankly, because you're like, oh, that felt nice, but now it doesn't feel right.
Yeah. And it's the hardest thing about it, because we've spoken a bit about this in mentoring, is that when you say this to people are a bit shocked initially when you say, okay, if you want to be in the top 1% of something, you have to get to the point where you no longer care what 99% of people say or think about you. You must simply make it irrelevant. Why would I care about that? Why am I listening to people that don't want to lift? They don't have to do what I'm doing. But if I'm aiming at excellence, absolute excellence, I cannot be listening to people who think that mediocre is okay. And the problem is that's like most people.
By definition.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's very difficult. Everywhere you go, you're surrounded by it. And you've just got to be able to hold that vision of what you're creating. Allow it. You got to hold it absolutely solid and safe and still. And you have to protect it with your life because that's actually what you're going to pay for it. So you've got to have that so protected. And at the same time, you can't hold it too tight. Otherwise, you'll crush it and you won't get to where you want to go either. So it's an amazing balance that you have to do.
And if I could try and give a bit of context here for some of the coaching that I feel like I've benefited from already working with you, is the manifestation thing had come into my life. I'd worked on it in a certain way. And one of the things that I'm wanting to get from working with you is a more sophisticated approach to manifestation.
Yeah.
And one of the problems that I had in hindsight was an opportunity had come to me and I was like, I've manifested this. This is what I wanted all along. But as you've taught me, it's like, well, is this opportunity part of the vision? Yeah. And this future you that you want to hold so close and so tight and really foster and nurture and bring into reality. And if that opportunity is not, then it's not, you haven't manifested it. It's just not, it's someone else's energy trying to come and get in the way. And
Yeah.
that was such a key insight for me, because I'm like, oh, well, no, I never wanted to do that. So what a surprise, it didn't work out.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. It's quite incredible that, because, well, we've talked about, like, there's a universal law, which is energy transformation. And what it is, that anything that you bring into form, whether that's a goal, you hold a vision, you suddenly are creating a form. Now, you're only creating at a conceptual level, but the more mass that you add to it, the more action that is aligned to that, and you give it the weight, it becomes more physical, more tangible. So in the beginning, energy is released, not stored. We're full of it. So we just release that energy in the creation. And that's when, like, people start a business and they go, right, I'm going to have I don't know, $5 million business. They start off, suddenly the energy lifts and the excitement, the enthusiasm, and they're starting to build and everything's rocking along. And then they hit 5 million and then it goes flat, and they don't know why it goes flat. And it's because, well, that's the parameter. You said that's what you want to do and you've done it. So it starts to flatten out. Now, instead of releasing energy, once it hits its form, it now starts to consume the energy that's been released in order to maintain stasis. And the reason that it has to do that is because there are entropic forces, there are external forces that are breaking down the structure in real time. And one of those main ones is everybody else's creation. Everybody else's things are happening. I was looking at the news this morning, and they're saying, in America, in Trump's executive order about everybody has to go back to the office. Well, this morning, 17,000 people turned up at the office that only has 4,500 car parks. So it completely deadlocked the entire street. But that's an example of an entropic force. They said, you might be brilliant at your work, you're doing everything you can do, and then suddenly somebody with a stroke of a pen has now thrown your entire existence into chaos. So you got to be able to hold your vision within that chaotic event, that battlefield. You've got to be able to walk across that battlefield. And it's not going to be because you've got good timing. It's going to be because you are going to hack and slash and block and weave, and you're going to do all those things. And at the end, you'll get to the other side. But that's how you're going to do it. So those entropic forces, everybody else's action upon it, and time and other energies, they start to break it down. And once we get to a certain point, a business will start to change. And probably another factor in business, of course, is the market changes. So as the market changes, that breaks down your business at an accelerating pace. So you will...
competition.
Absolutely. And you just go in there and it starts breaking down. And you're in those stages in your life because not only does everything feel flat, but it also means it feels slow. It feels dragged out. It feels like I get up and I'm like, why bother? I said, well, of course, because you've got no energy left. The battery's flat. So you can use that. If you know what you're doing, you can use that as a springboard into the next creative phase. And people that run successful businesses or successful marriages or successful anythings, they're constantly managing that cycle, those 3 stages. They're constantly throwing off creative phases at different levels. And in doing that, they've always got fuel coming in as fuel's going out.
Yeah, because we talked about managing one's day from a perspective of energy in and energy out.
Yeah.
So perhaps you could teach people what that means.
Yeah. Okay. So if you think about it from a perspective of, I use a model. I built this model. After I built it, I realized it had been around me everywhere. Right? So you just go, oh, okay, did I build it? Did I just actually wake up to it? But it was simply, when we look at a day's work, we say, okay, this is what I can get done in a day. These are like my KPIs. If I can meet my KPIs on today, then it's been a good day. If I can let my ego get out of that and look at it realistically and say, yeah, that's a good day's work, then instead of taking 8, 10, 12 hours to do that, I should be able to compress the timeline and get that down into about 6 hours. Now, I do that by getting rid of waste that I didn't know was there, and I keep the focus high. because what we do is we get momentum, and that momentum is everything when it comes to change and growth, because basically the universe changes instantly. So anything slower than that is a drag. So the more you can align yourself with instantaneous change, the more in alignment with natural law you are. So 6-hour day, what you do in order to do that, you don't work with the idea of I need to just go, because it's not a hustle. It's all about taking your foot off the brake instead of putting your other foot on the accelerator. And understanding that before you can give energy, you have to receive energy. Before you receive energy, you have to give energy. So you have to play that balance. Where do I give energy in order to receive? And how do I use that received energy in order to give again at a higher level? And then giving allows a correction so I can bring more in. And you just work with it. And it's actually very simple. I work with an A4 diary. I write 3 columns. One's got appointments today, because that time's not mine. That's already sold. So any other free time is broken between energy in, energy out. So I will have a whole heap of things that I do that are giving me fuel, that are connecting me to vision, that are bringing me into my alignment and repairing the damage, like an athlete has to recover from hard training. And then on the other page is hard training. So what am I doing? This is contacting clients. This is doing admin work. This is developing products. This is all of those things.
Hopping on a podcast,
right?
Awesome.
So we just back and forward off that. And by doing that, it's incredible the momentum you gain.
So Jason, I confess I've not yet been able to build that into my day as well as I would like, but it's certainly something that I'm working towards, as you know. And therefore I can't necessarily say I've benefited from this. But for yourself, to put that question to you, when you start thinking like this, it seems so simple. It really does. Okay, an example that's been obvious to me since now I've thought about it is when you have a to-do list, how fucking epic it feels when you like bash through stuff.
Yeah.
But like when you don't, and I've got something sitting on my to-do list now for like 8 weeks and I just haven't done it. And it's just annoying. And there's an email in my inbox that hasn't moved for like 8 weeks. You're like, ugh.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, right?
It is. And the reason for that is because the way your brain works is it only does one thing. It solves problems. So when you stick something on a to-do list, you've opened a loop and you've gone, right, here's a problem. We need to give energy to solve this problem. We need to close the loop. Now, if you don't close the loop, you're spending energy keeping it running. You've got to commit energy to it. And the more of it you've got, the more energy is being siphoned off to run all these side ideas. That's one of the big returns on it, because the principle of working like that is so I can have more time, more space, more energy, not so I can cram more in. And that's where you've got to get your ego out.
Which is also interesting, just as an investor. It's very contrarian. This idea that like, if you want to go fast, you've actually got to slow down.
Exactly right.
Or you actually want to achieve things, we've got to stop doing stuff. It's like, what?
Yeah.
That's the complete opposite of what I think I want. Is that pattern something that you start to see everywhere?
Yeah, you do. And what happens is, like, I mean, if you look at it just in the simplest form, we talk about universal law. The best example of universal law is nature. If you understand the laws, as soon as you look at nature, I'm looking out the window. I live in a remote village in southern Tasmania, and I'm looking out the window at rolling hills and forests and all that sort of stuff. And when you look out there, you can see it everywhere. You can see those laws everywhere. And if we take anything from nature, we have to take this. There is zero waste. Nothing is wasted in nature. Everything has a purpose. Even in death, things move into a new stage of usefulness. And that whole process, it just doesn't end. Where we have problems in it is where we try and put our concept of what nature should be doing for us, and we start messing with it. So, like you said before, it's simple. The nature is simple. Truth is simple. The complexity that we have in our lives are really just layer upon layer of bullshit that we're believing in. And we're complicating stuff that we don't need to. And it's inefficient. And if you were in a boat, you're in a canoe, right? And you're paddling, you can paddle upstream That's against nature. Okay. So it's like, okay, it's going to be harder, more effort. But if you've got 2 or 3 people in that canoe and they're all paddling with different timings in different directions, how efficient do you think it's going to be? If you get in alignment with natural law, that's like putting your boat out into the middle of the river, because you know that's where the water moves fastest and smoothest, and you pull your oar in. You don't paddle at all. You let the water take you at much faster and easier than you think you would go. And then all you got to do is put in occasionally and just give a little prod just to correct where you want to go. It's so efficient.
Wow.
But we don't do it.
And Jason, that makes me think about capital allocation and misallocation. So it's like you're chucking good money after bad. And so if you can figure out where and when you're doing that, that makes you a much better investor. And that is, of course, in some ways the holy grail. Which is the good place to put your money? I don't know. But if you can start to think like this, it's just a whole nother layer of sophistication that is just opening up for me now, to be honest. This kind of energy work, that energy and emotional work as well, like busting through old school trauma that, wasn't even mine in some cases.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's just wild to me, that you can start to think at this kind of level. And I know the results I'm going to get will be basically unbelievable. You're like, whoa, how did that happen? And it'd be from this work. I can see something on the tip of your tongue. Did I?
No, I was just thinking about it, because it's like, there's people. I deal with a lot of people who have an extremely high level of perception. And I'll call it that, because otherwise what most people look at and they go, oh, this person's got like, they're an empath. These are identities that people create to cover their own lack of discipline. So, I'm an empath. I walk into a room, I feel everybody's emotions. No, you have poor boundaries. Right? You're full of trauma. You haven't done the work on yourself. You've got poor boundaries. You're not special. You're just really getting slapped in the face by everything. It's like, put a helmet on, grow up. Wow. So you can imagine I don't have many friends in the industry. But what happens is we get caught up in this. So a lot of people will say, oh, I've got a person who, I know this person who's a clairvoyant, right? What do they do? Oh, they read cards or whatever. That's what people think people do with these abilities. It's not true. A lot of people do. But the people that are in the outstanding level, they're not doing that at all. If you had an ability to understand, to be able to perceive energy, to be able to manipulate your relationship with time, to understand natural law, why would you sit at a mind-body festival and read cards for strangers for like $30 for half an hour? Why would you do that? The people that are skilled, outstanding at that, they're in business. They've got their own businesses. They're investing. They're using a high level of perception, not clairvoyance, a high level of perception, to be able to read the flows of the energy around the work that they do. And they're turning that into successful business, and those results in the quality of life.
Yeah, and happiness.
I work with those people. I love those people.
Epic. I absolutely love this stuff. So Jason, I'm a bit torn to where to go next. There's so many things I want to talk about, but I think we should do this first, which is just from a pure beginner perspective. You talk about law and universal law. So if you could give someone like a crash course, 5-minute, like these are the universal laws.
Okay. All right. So there's a lot. You don't need a lot. My entire life turned around with one. Right? That one that turned around for me was what we've already discussed, energy transmutation.
And was that from the time of crisis that you touched on at the very start?
Yeah, exactly.
Really?
Yeah.
So this one law helped you get out of that rut. I love these kind of stories. Okay, go.
So I'll tell you the story. I think I might have told you the story, but I'll share it. So, and this is a perception story. This is not a woo-woo story. It's just a story of different perception. My health had been going downhill quite rapidly, and I had a bit of a deal with my boss that they were going to let me work until I could no longer stand up, because I was the sole breadwinner, and we didn't know how else we were going to do it. So at that time, so it was like, keep working. Anyway, I went out that morning, I was talking to clients, I came back and I walked in the office to my boss and said, I'm sorry, but today's the day I'm done. And I said, I've got nothing left in the tank. And they went, okay, no worries. And while I was having that conversation, phone ring in the office, person came in and said, hey, you've got to go to the hospital because your dad's dying now. And it's like, okay, I've got to go do that. So I had a side business at the time. I was teaching martial arts and kung fu, like Chinese martial arts and qigong and things like that. And in that one day, my health collapsed. My mental wellness soon followed. My father died. We had to make decisions about what came next, which meant something I've been working on for 20 years about creating a life in the north of Tasmania. That just went out the window. My wife had to go back to work because we didn't know what else we could do. And there was no work that she could find at that time because it was in a bit of a difficult time for employment in northern Tasmania at that point. And she got a job down south. So we moved south, and I moved next door to my mentor, right? We moved in on the same day, right? And my whole life had just fallen to pieces. I had nothing. I had no health. I had nothing. And I was staying home with two young children. One was 1 and one was 6. And the 6-year-old had significant disability. So we were just like, well, okay, this is what it is. And as I said before, like there was no prospects on that. It's very difficult when you do a stay-at-home dad thing in a situation. One of the things very hard is that when people say, what do you do? And you say, well, I'm a stay-at-home dad. And people go, that's great. I remember when I took my long service and I did that and I did all this. And you're just like, yeah, that's not my experience. You said you got paid for every second that you were doing it. You knew it was like an extended holiday and you went back to your old life when you finished that. So you had all these prospects. I had nothing. I had doctors saying, you'll never work again. He said, you're wrecked. You're done. You're completely burnt out. Forget it. So, maybe you can get DSP if you're lucky, support pension. And it was just like, I don't like that at all. Don't like that idea at all. So, yeah. And it was hard road. But
Wow.
What happened was when we first moved south, we went into Hobart and we were going to buy some kids' clothes. My wife got her first paycheck and she just gave me $20 and said, look, just go for a walk up the street. Go and have a wander around. Just have a bit of fun. And I went for a walk. And as I was going along, I had this clear perception of my father standing at the end of the street, pointing uphill. And it was like, I got to walk up this side of the road. I don't know why. But it was a split second, just bang. It was like, whoa, looks like I'm going up the street. So I started walking up the street and I came to a secondhand bookshop and there was a book dancing around. And it's that joke about, God give me a sign and like the truckloads of stop, go back signs go past, So it was like, it was this. And the book was on intergenerational family wealth, which was the one thing my father had been trying to teach me his entire life. So I walked into this shop and I said to this guy, could I have a look at that book? And he said, yeah, you may as well. I can't get it to sit on the stand anyway. And I looked at it. I looked at the title. I flicked into it and I just went, yep, I need to read this. And I said, how much do you want for it? He said, well, it's like an $86, $87 book. I was going to sell it for $30, $20. It's yours. Wow. And my wife had given me $20. I had $20. And it was just like, thank you. And away we went.
Wow.
And that book gave me an awareness of transmutation. And they talked about it from the analogy of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. How the first generation will come from poverty and they will build an empire. They then give it to their children. And the second generation go into stasis because they don't know how to build it, but they've seen it built, so they know how to maintain it. And then their children have never seen any of that. All they've known is all the benefits. So they come in and they just destroy it. They just spend it all until it's all gone. And then they're back in poverty. And then the next generation starts in poverty and has to create again. So that was where I started to learn about law. And if you understand that you can make your fortune out of that, because I certainly have. And other laws that are really important, one is perpetual increase. People are obsessed with the law of attraction. Forget that. That's a waste of your time. It's nice to know that it exists, but it's a bit like gravity. You don't have to be managing gravity. It handles that for you. And all the laws are the same. But perpetual increase is the awareness that everything is becoming more of itself. So if you put effort into something, even if you just start off by changing the way you think, if you keep doing it consistently, what it will do is it will start to grow. And as it grows, it gets more mass. And that mass becomes things like suddenly you feel differently about it. Now your hormones are changing your body, so that's a different mass. You're resonating differently. That's a different experience. And now you speak differently. That's sharing with other people. Now you're committing people like we're doing now, right? Just talking, we're changing the way people think about things and how they feel about things, and then what they're going to say and the actions that people take. And that's more mass again. And then as that starts to build, you get more and more. So perpetual increase is the law that runs investing. Compounding. Compounding, anybody's successful at anything, and it doesn't matter whether it's successful at Shaolin Kung Fu or it's successful at business, it always gets down to two things. You must use principles that work. That's compounding. And you must do it consistently. If you've got consistent compounding, you don't need genius. I said you'll win. You will win. It'll just take time. And the smarter you get, the more you can compress that timeline. So other principles about universal law, what's really important about it is probably the first one, which is mentalism, which is that everything in the world is experienced through the mind. And that one thing that people don't talk about is that when you make a decision, you literally change reality. It's a committed focus of mind saying, I want this to exist. Not only do I want it to exist, but I'm prepared to put the consistency and compounding behind it. And when you do that, the universe responds. And that is because the pure energy that is being drawn from is psychoreactive. It does literally respond to how we think in it. I'll let that sit for a minute because that's actually a super important point.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's, again, so many different directions to go, but I think the thing that resonates most about what you've just talked through is there's so many things in life that you notice to be true, but they're not based in what feels like sound logic. Does that make sense?
That's
So
exactly right.
things like where your mind goes, your money follows.
Yeah.
That's a really nice phrase that I love. Or success leaves clues. You follow these things, but that idea of like perpetual motion. So that actually makes more sense. And basically, you're investing and you're putting good money after good.
Yeah.
And so you're helping it compound and grow. And thank you so much for sharing that story. I could really feel like it was just an extraordinarily difficult moment in your life. And somehow out of the darkest times come the best things. And I
Absolutely.
don't know why that's true necessarily, but the night is darkest before the dawn.
Yeah.
That phrase is another great one. In fact, that's made me just shiver. Whoa. As if you got that signal. Oh, hey, Dad. Oh, you want me to walk up here? Oh, okay, cool. Oh, I've got the exact perfect amount of money for this one book. And I'm now a couple of pages off finishing it. And I would like to give you full credit for introducing it to me. And that book has helped me to really see, that's probably how you would do it a bit better. And the idea of like having every family member think about investing as a group. So working with cousins, working like instead of vertically with uncles and aunties and grandparents and parents, it's like actually what does this new tranche of talent want to do? And the book, coaches you through the idea of, I want every year to see a resume from every family member. It's like, this is what I absolutely love doing. And then it's the family's job to figure out how to finance them towards what they feel like is their calling.
Yeah.
And this to me is just, again, it's a much more sophisticated approach to capital allocation. And I've loved it. And what an extraordinary story that's where it came from.
Yeah. And it was at a time when I literally had nothing. So that $20, that was my $20, right? That was the $20 spare that we had. I turned myself around from zero money to, and it started off very slow. And that's the thing, because you don't know how to work with the tools in a sophisticated manner. As soon as you get to the point where you start to understand how to use them, you realize just how quickly this thing can move. So I got to a point where, like, remember what I said, like doctors are saying to you, you will never work again.
Wow.
You have to put that out of your head. And I was like, no, I don't think so. I said, I that doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't feel right to me that at this stage in my life that I should just sit on the couch, because I had worked in disability employment and I had met so many people that took that advice and they stayed there. And I remember I met one woman who had a good career, and she went through a doctor. She'd had back and neck pain, and she went and saw a doctor, and the doctor had said to her, "There's nothing can be done. You've got a misaligned disc in your back, like misaligned vertebra in your back, and nothing can be done about that. You just have to take painkillers." And she was in pain all the time, and the painkillers weren't really working, and nothing was changing. And for like 3 or 4 years, that had been her life. And I said to her, "I don't understand your issue. You've only seen the doctor. The doctor said you've got a misaligned disc in your back. Like not a like is it a like a slip disc or a crushed vertebra?" It's like no, it's out of alignment. I said, "You mean you could just go to a chiropractor and go crunch, or have a nice hot bath and then look over your left shoulder, and all of that would go away?" It had never occurred to her. It had never occurred to her that that was an option, because it was like, no, doctor said there's nothing you can do. So I'm a little bit ruthless in that way, because if you want to build yourself out of nothing, you've got to be ruthless, right? You've got to be equally kind in the way in which you apply it, but you've got to be bloody ruthless in the way you think about it. And that's not Machiavellian about what can I get from other people. You've got to be able to say, this is exactly the stupidity I'm doing. I'm not going to soft pedal it. I'm also not going to beat myself up over it. I just need to go, this bit here doesn't work. We need to rip that out. We need to change it. And we need to do it in a way that's not destroying the humanistic capital that we've got. So that, for me, it was like, there was my $20, and it took a long time. And I started doing energy work and doing all these things. And over time it built. And then an opportunity came up to work in a BP up the road. And I did that. And then 10 weeks later, I got given another job, and opportunity came for another job, and I took that job. And that led to the next, to the next, to the next. And they've been quantum leaps. But the difference was going to a point where I remember I had a hobby, and that was, everything else was just house money. And I had a little bit of money for myself. It was $10 a week. That was actually it was $10 a fortnight, I remember. So that was how much money I had to play with. And then when I got this job at BP, suddenly we had like an extra $400 a fortnight coming in. So that was a quantum leap when you're used to $10, right? So that was a quantum leap, and it went there. But then 10 weeks later, my first paycheck that I got was $3,900. And you're just like, it's a whole different ball game. And then hitting that the next fortnight, that was the funniest thing, hit the next fortnight, and we're still barely dinted last pay. And now another one's come in. It's like, holy shit. like this is different. And then you start to think differently. And it's a huge thing, is that as you start to get yourself into alignment, you get momentum. Often we think that we make mistakes. We think that we make good choices, bad choices. It's not really the case. It's just fast and slow. So slow choices, you can die. You can die from the slowness of choice. Like that woman I was telling you, she spent 3 years. She had a career. She had everything going well in her life. And because she got bad advice and she agreed with it, she brought her momentum to an absolute standstill. All it was an idea.
Wow.
She could have gone and had a massage, and her back would have gone crunch, and problem solved. There was no physiological problem.
I can't help but feel that kind of character wants to be told to sit down and do nothing at that stage in their life, right?
Yeah.
And that's why this is so interesting. This is all mindset.
Yeah.
So it's pure intellectual capital. That's really what it is, right? As you're teaching yourself to access different tiers of wisdom that wasn't necessarily available to you before. Oh my gosh, Jason, I've loved this. There's one subject I want to just talk through and share from my perspective, which is how I met you. Yeah. And my daughter Cleo is now just over 2 years old. And when she was born in 2022, like, I guess from a let's say from a capital perspective, my wife and I very much investing in our humanistic capital, and we went down the route of home birth, and she was the second home birth child we had, which is a beautiful experience. But about 8 to 10 weeks into her life, my wife comes to me, she's just broken, completely broken. And
Yeah.
there's something not right, Jake. I don't know what's going on, but I can't handle this baby. And when she wasn't asleep and she wasn't feeding, she was just blood curdling, screaming.
Yeah.
And we were going down rabbit hole after rabbit hole. And I now joke that, as an entrepreneur, the best possible market I've ever seen is to sell shit to freaking out new parents. Like you'll do anything, right, to try and solve this problem. But I remember that like almost crescendo moment was we were getting advice about, she's got this colic problem and it's all about the gas and it's something to do with what Lauren might be eating. And so she'd been like hyper vigilant on all of her diet. And we were talking to nutritionists and seeing chiropractor and trying to get hold of an osteo and just doing everything we possibly could to try and solve this child's unsettled problem. And I remember now there's videos we've got of her screaming. And I even just the first moment I hear that noise, I have to switch it off. I cannot handle it. It goes right to the core of like, oh my God, that was intense. And, we're getting an hour's sleep here and there between us. And we came up with this, like, we got coached to like how to like pick the baby up and bounce up and down. I was doing all this crazy shit. Anyway, shout out to Amanda who introduced us because we were like, she's possessed. There's something weird going on here. What can possibly be the cause of this? And I had this extraordinary experience where Loz and I had this discussion and we've been seeing an osteopath. Shout out to Jel as well. He did some amazing work with her. But Jel told us the story of her son who'd been speaking with some kind of supernatural force. And he was struggling to sleep in a room. And Jel had a baby monitor on. And she saw/heard this thing making these noises through the monitor. It was like, it's making me shiver even now.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so I'm trying to get clear to sleep. I'm like, and something came to me where I was like, I need to talk. And I had the baby on my forearm here and I got it by the back of her neck. It's like, you need to leave now. And I got strong. And I know you need to leave now. And this real massive rush of energy came out of me. And the baby just fell asleep like a little angel on my arm. And I put her in the cot and I come out and I'm like, Loz, you never guess what just happened. But like, I just talked to something. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that Sunday, we then had a phone call with you.
Yeah.
And within 48 hours or even 24 hours of our phone call, we had a normal, happy, sleeping baby on our hands.
Yeah.
Just to take you back to that moment, what did you do in the 45-minute long call that we had? And what did you find? And I won't ruin the rest of the story, but I'll let you take it on from there.
Yeah. It's a powerful thing. Basically, goodness, to summarize it. So the thing that's funny about that kind of work is that when you're doing that work, it has to sound to the person on the other end of the phone, it has to sound like everything's just so simple. And on this side of the phone, it's like those guys that have got plates on sticks, That's what it's like. You're managing so much stuff. But basically what happens is we live in a culture that thinks that the world is a certain way. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that luxury. I remember one time a person asked me about my work and I was saying, I did a lot of entity clearing and stuff like that. And they said, oh yeah, I don't believe in any of that. And I said, I don't believe in it either. But when you're standing in the room with it, belief is unnecessary. It is
that's real. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to say that's like saying I don't believe in poverty or sexual abuse or war or violence. I don't believe in that. Why? Because I've never experienced it. And if I did, I didn't realize it. I just thought Auntie Mabel just kept running into doors and falling down the stairs all the time. I said, I had no idea she was in a domestic violence situation. I said, just because that's how you see the world doesn't mean you're right. So, unfortunately, people don't always have that luxury, and that was what happened to you. So, what I did in that work, in simplest terms, was through training. You can train yourself to use the divine, the aspect of the divine that is you, to control the mind instead of the other way around. Most people teach meditation is control your mind so you can one day access the divine. It's the wrong way around. Just step into your divine. And then what I'm doing with that is from the divine, I'm essentially talking to source. I'm talking to God, for want of a better term. And God is talking to the divine in you. And I'm giving my perception is saying, this needs to change, that needs to change, that needs to change. And then your spirit is going, oh, I hadn't thought about it like that. Okay, we'll get rid of that, we'll get rid of that, we'll get rid of that. And what had happened in that particular instance was there had been entities that were in the land where you were living, and they were struggling, they were in pain, and they had a moment of opportunity in which they were able to take hold of the child's space, energy, and they were able to get a doorway there. And they were using that to get access to find someone that could help them. So what we did was we fixed that for them. We healed those entities. We told them that was it. We fixed what they needed. We gave them what they needed. They gratefully left. They left, and that's that.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And to give more specifics, you described them, the property that we were living in at the time, the construction work nearby, at some point in the last 80, 90 years, they'd been disturbed. And when we look back on, we've got these amazing videos of the labor process and Lauren giving birth to Cleo. And what we noticed in hindsight is that there was a long time between when she exited the womb and gave her first cry. And what we since learned is that's a very, very vulnerable time in the life cycle of a soul. And so essentially the elemental spirit was able to attach itself. And the reason she was crying so much was because she felt like she had hooks in her spine.
Yes, I remember that
one. Do you remember?
Yeah.
And it's just, it literally happened. And within a day of doing this, because I remember as well, you were on the call and you did this, you kind of go, it's like you how you start your meditation. I remember very specifically. And it's like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
And suddenly Cleo's, like her behavior changed completely. And she suddenly became like a baby. Whereas before it was like, what is going on? And okay, so last question, Jason, is something resonated a lot, which is often people come to you when they're like 50, 60 years old and they go, something's just always not been quite right.
That's right.
We just so happen to have, perhaps perception's the right word, to come across you 10 weeks into her life and be like, we need to solve this problem now.
Yeah.
And we're very fortunate to be able to do that. So why is it that people take such a long time to figure out they need to come and see someone like yourself?
Well, it's the paradigm, isn't it? You don't know what you don't know. What do you do when you turn around and you go, I feel like I'm possessed, and everyone you talk to goes, don't be stupid. Everybody knows that's not real. Like, what do you do then? So people in our society, it does my head in Australia. The leading cause of death for women in Australia between 18 and 55 years of age is domestic violence.
Wow.
The leading cause of death by a long shot. And we just pretend it's a little thing that happens on the fringes. It's not. It's everywhere. It's 1 in 4.
Wow.
1 in 4.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Hell.
And in certain areas, it's like 1 in 1. You'd be lucky to get 10% of a population, 3% of a population that has not been abused. Not like hasn't been affected by it, is that everyone else in their family has. They somehow managed to escape that. So we look at that and we go, oh yeah, we're so enlightened and we're so clever. So we can't even manage that. So when you come at something like I have supernatural trauma, some of the stories, some of the things that I have seen and had to deal with, it is staggering what people go through their lives with. And we look at it, and worse than that, they can't tell anyone. So they can't tell anyone, so they have to sit in silence. And then they get to a point in their life where everybody around them's either died of old age or, they've moved away or whatever. And then they suddenly have the opportunity, the freedom to go, I need to talk to someone about this. And if they get to, just that ability to say, okay, that makes sense. Like even with your example, just being able to say, it's like my daughter's possessed. I'm not saying, oh yeah, she's possessed. It's just like, okay.
Well, that's what it's like. Yeah.
If somebody said, I don't understand, it's like I've got an arrow stuck out of my shoulder.
Hmm.
That's what it feels like. So, well, you'd go and look at the shoulder, wouldn't you? If it's got an arrow sticking out, you go, oh, there you go. You were right. Okay. But you don't go, oh, no, I don't know anybody that does archery, therefore you couldn't possibly have an arrow in your shoulder.
Hmm. It's like closed-minded versus open-minded, and that ability to be
Yeah.
more open-minded is just so powerful. Jason, listen, it's been absolutely awesome chatting today. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sure there'll be people out there that will want to learn more about what you do.
Yep.
So just as a handoff to finish off the episode, where can people reach out and get in touch?
Well, I have a website. I don't really advertise because I'm always fully booked. But
Cool.
I do.
Well done.
Yeah. So thelifeprinciple.com. And yeah, people can catch me through that. They can contact me through that.
Cool.
And yeah, my picture's on it. You'll know that I'm there. And yeah, it'd be lovely to hear from people.
Awesome. And I can highly recommend the work that we've done together as some of the most valuable I've ever done. So thank you for that. Awesome. Well, appreciate your time today. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Jake. It's a pleasure.